Welcome in to the home of best ball in Europe. That is right. It is Fantasy Sanctuary, and I'm joined by none other than Fantasy Life's Dwain McFarland, one of our very favorite people to have with us on the show. I think this is visit number 3 of the Sanctuary now. Dwain, how are you doing?
I'm good, man. Yeah, I think it is number 3. So yeah, I'm glad to be a favorite and glad to be a return guest. I always enjoy hanging out with you, so it's always easy for me to say yes when we're chatting.
Absolutely. So the last time we had you on, we are going to jump into a DraftKings draft in just a moment. But
Yeah, let's do it.
first, last time we had you on, it was in the pre-draft process, and we were talking about players who the analytics loved and players that the analytics didn't particularly love. Since then, has there been any kind of players that you've particularly changed your mind on?
You mean talking about guys from the draft, like based on like
Well,
where they landed and stuff, or
the draft, like situations where they landed, where you're like, okay, maybe I need to rejudge this.
yeah, I mean, obviously, draft capital is an important part of the model. Like, it's the biggest driver of the model. So so draft day does matter a lot. Now, hopefully, it's the same guys that we're already grading out high ahead in the process, and then whenever they get drafted high, then that's great. The ones where you have to stop and kind of be like, okay, what does this mean for sure? Or the guys like say Xavier Leggett, where he gets taken at the end of the first round, and the fantasy life supermodel for wide receivers really looked at Leggett as being a guy that, maybe should have been a day 3 pick, so, but an NFL team liked him and took him there. So it definitely moved him up in the model. And I'll say he's a guy that I found myself willing to take in best ball drafts where he goes, just based on the fact that, they still invested that first round capital in him. Another guy that the model kind of liked ahead of time, but liked even more after the draft was Jalen Polk for the New England Patriots. Wasn't like this high end target earner, Tom, in college, but he played with a lot of other really good, players. Obviously, Rome Odunze went in round 1, but you get this depth chart where it's like the wild, wild west. It's wide open. We don't really know who's going to be the starters, who won't be the starters, but we get Drake May eventually under center, for that team at some point this year. I think a guy like Polk or even Javon Baker, those are guys that I really like taking later in drafts. Polk's moving up, which I think he should. Like, he's been one of the more mispriced wide receivers, in my opinion, just based on going higher in the second round.
When are you expecting Drake May to start? Like, I'm kind of in the camp that I want to see rookie quarterbacks out there nice and early, particularly these ones who get high draft capital. I think you go back and look at Trey Lance, and there's always going to be a part of me that just can't get past this. But like, if Trey Lance had gotten on the field early, I think he could have had a chance to develop in a way that he just never did. Do you think Drake May has a real shot at getting out there from the beginning of the season? And if so, do you think that's the right shot?
I think so. And I mean, a lot of it for me is just based on the fact that we don't think that the Patriots are going to be very good. So when I look at the Patriots right now, I mean, they're projected. The last I updated was in late May, but 4.5 wins. Maybe they're at 5.5 now, because typically when teams are that low, someone will push them up. But you look at that beginning of the year schedule, it's pretty tough. Like, it wouldn't surprise me at all if by week 6, Drake May's under center. There's also the chance that Drake May just beats out Jacoby Brissett in training camp. Like, things were starting to warm up for him in OTAs, so I wouldn't rule that out.
This is Jacoby Brissett, who last year spent the entire season on the bench. Yes, he was good for the Browns, but like, it's doesn't seem like a complete foregone conclusion to me that Drake May just isn't better than him. So yeah, I'm definitely kind of with you there. We've drawn the 11 slot in this draft. At the front end, I know we've got Michael Heary, who's in a lot of our drafts, who's picking up a 2 slot. Looking at some of your recent work on Fantasy Life, which is always must-read stuff for me, and anyone who isn't checking it out should absolutely be doing so. I know you've got CeeDee Lamb in a tier of his own ahead of all the other wide receivers. But in these drafts, do you have him ahead of CMC, or are you comfortable taking CMC just because it's harder to get the 101 and harder to get CMC because of that?
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to draft a ton, I get it. But I think that this is actually the format where you can make an even bigger case for CeeDee Lamb, because it's the full point PPR. But Lamb, he's on an offense with a really good quarterback in Dak Prescott. What you think about him as an NFL quarterback is separate, like, from the fact that he can support high totals for fantasy players. So Dak can come out and put up the yardage. Not a lot of target competition, and CeeDee Lamb is squarely in his prime. And last year, obviously, he took his game to a new level. So I think those things alone, and the fact that you have 3 starting wide receivers in this format, I think, like, all things considered, CeeDee Lamb should be the number 1 pick in this format. But to your point, he's not. And so if you want your exposure to CeeDee Lamb, if you're gonna draft 150 teams, you're gonna take some if you want your exposure to CMC, you're gonna take him there. But, in a vacuum, I think in this format, CeeDee Lamb should be the first pick overall.
Yeah, I'd hit a point where I must have run pure on 101s, and I was looking at my exposure, and I was overweight, sort of like 10% on Christian McCaffrey and down at 6% on CD Lamb, and I was like, I can't go into the season with that. You know, from the Cowboys bye week last year, Dak Prescott in points per game was only like 0.1 behind Josh Allen for the rest of the way. And if you've got that stack with Dak throwing for 300 passing yards, CD Lamb picking up 100 yards, that's an extra 6 points here on DraftKings. We've got Michael in the chat saying, Dwayne, Ian, and Andrew on the old PFF Fantasy Show, my entry point to DFS and subsequently Best Ball. So, yeah, you know it's going to be a good show. We are 2 picks away, picking up the 11th spot. Puka Nacua, AJ Brown, Garrett Wilson, Jahmyr Gibbs, Marvin Harrison. How are you handling this kind of turn at this point in the draft season, Dwayne?
I like all those guys, so I'm constantly looking at my exposures, but in a vacuum, I'm going with AJ Brown. I am super excited about what the Eagles are doing on offense.
So AJ Brown went. So Garrett Wilson's up next.
Yeah, I love Garrett Wilson.
Gibbs. Yeah,
I'm going Garrett Wilson in this format.
I was drafting in the Fantasy Pros $350 championship with Andrew Erickson on Sunday, and we got AJ Brown in. He's a player who's kind of slipped past me a bit at times, or I've erred slightly towards Puka Nacua. But yeah, I just think that Jalen Hurts healthy is going to be a massive difference. We're only 2 picks away, so we can come back to this after our next selection. But we've got Jahmyr Gibbs, Marvin Harrison, Drake London, Saquon Barkley, Jonathan Taylor. Any particular lean there, Drake? Dwayne?
No, yeah. You could call out my old partner there, Drake. Yeah, I give him to me again, but I love Drake London. I think Drake London's in a massive.
Then Jahmyr Gibbs, Marvin Harrison.
Yeah, I like Harrison and I like Gibbs. I think it's one of those 3. It's either Gibbs, Harrison, or London.
Let's go Gibbs. I'm a little bit lower on exposure to Gibbs lately, and I don't think I've got many pairings of Garrett Wilson and Jahmyr Gibbs. Just going back to your previous point on the Eagles, how much are you expecting Kellen Moore to make a difference there?
Well, it just depends on if they let him fully implement, everything he wants to do with the offense. Like, because there's a lot that could happen. Number one, you could just see more plays because Kellen Moore, his neutral play clock rate, much higher than what we saw from the Eagles, who had an efficient offense last year, but we're not a super fast offense. And then you have the potential for more passing attempts because you have a more pass-heavy minded coach than what we've had in the past. Nick Sirianni, I think, is going to kind of keep some of that under control. I don't think it's going to completely turn into the Kellen Moore offense, but I think there's a potential for more volume. But then the other big part is just the Eagles were a really stagnant offense last year. Didn't move players around a lot, didn't use a lot of motion. And Kellen Moore, if you look at what he's done over the last several seasons, especially what he did last year with the Chargers, he is going to be using motion a lot. And I did a study looking at routes with motion versus routes without motion for wide receivers over the last 3 years of the NFL. And a route with motion is worth 55% more than a route without motion. So that it's a major cheat code. Now, look, some of the times it comes down to which players are getting used in those things, but this is across the whole league over the last 3 years. Anytime a wide receiver was in motion at the snap, and then you divide that by all the fantasy points on those routes, and then do the same thing for whenever there's not motion, it's a lot. Now, part of it is, again, the guys getting put in motion a lot of time are the best players, like Tyreek Hill. So the point being, though, AJ Brown's a really good player. I think that's also going to help Devonta Smith. But if I had to pick a guy, Tom, and I'd love your thoughts, if I'm really trying to move a piece around my offense to get the big yak plays and things like that, it's AJ Brown. I mean, I love Devonta Smith too, but he's more of a, he can get open, do his thing. He's not a huge yak guy, man. You give AJ Brown just a little bit more room to work with, I think it can go a long way.
Yeah, and you've kind of answered Tyler's question in the chat there, and on who any lean on who Kellen Moore is better for, AJ Brown or Smith, particularly.
I think both will get more motion, by the way. I think it's going to be good for both of them, but I think that AJ Brown might be able to maximize it more.
When you see AJ Brown with a head of steam, I mean, you go back and I remember him destroying my Ravens in the playoffs and in games when the Titans were feisty, and he was just balling through multiple defenders who struggled to stop him. So the idea of giving him ahead of steam. I think that's really an interesting point that perhaps I hadn't considered. One thing I kept going back to with Kellen Moore is whether he rejuvenates Dallas Goedert, who we know previous to last year was a bit of a screen merchant and would get a lot of them. But Kellen Moore's also featured tight ends at points over his time as an offensive coordinator. Do you think it's an arrow up for him, or do you think that like he's kind of on the downward slope now?
I think that so last year I got screamed at because I said Goddard was rated a tier 2 high. And it turned out being right. I just looked at his talent profile. Everything about him is fit in the offense. And I was like, he's going a tier 2 high, but I still liked him. Well, now people have overreacted. I think he's actually going a tier 2 low this year in fantasy drafts. So I'm writing my tight ends tiers article right now, like as we speak. I took a break from it to jump on here. And Goddard, I think, is one of the most underpriced tight ends right now. I don't know that scheme is going to matter enough for him just because A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith are such high-end target earners. Essentially, Dallas Goedert needs one of those guys to go down to truly unlock like a top 6 upside. But I think he has a real chance to be in that 10, 11, 12 range and still give you some really nice spike weeks, even though he's having to deal with those other two guys. So I agree. Kellen Moore he has shown that he knows how to use the tight ends. But if you're just like everything equal, everything straight up, I think the target share upside of Devonta Smith and A.J. Brown is going to cap what we see from Goddard.
Nice. Yeah, I think on the whole, I'm just really high on the Eagles offense, and
Me too.
I would prefer.
I think that's the takeaway. Just be high on the Eagles, and it's already high. I mean, everybody's taking them, man. There was a time though where we could stack all these guys together. You could get Devonta Smith,
yeah,
Brown. Those days are obviously over unless you want to really set it up and get interesting. I will say this. I think this is the best chance A.J. Brown's ever going to have had in his career to finish as the wide receiver 1 overall. The biggest challenge is he's got to overcome people like CeeDee Lamb, other young players that are really good that are in their prime. But A.J. Brown, when you look at his talent profile, it's as strong as anyone in the NFL. He can rival anyone.
We've spent an awful lot of time talking about a player we missed out on by one spot. But we are back up to,
yeah, whoops, my bad. We've can of worms on that one, buddy.
Yeah, well, Travis Kelce slid a little down from 29 to pick 33-ish. We're 2 away. Then Sam Laporta also seems to be sliding a little bit. Then Stephon Diggs, Etienne, Josh Allen, Michael Pittman, Devil likes Tank Dell. We are 1 more pick away. Travis Kelce does go off the board. It seems like the onesie positions are sliding a decent amount here on DraftKings at the minute. But with 1 pick away, well, there we go. Josh Allen goes. So it's Sam Laporta, Diggs, Etienne, Pittman, Pacheco, Tank Dell, Lamar, that kind of range of the
How
draft.
far are we past ADP on Laporta?
Laporta is 4 spots past ADP.
Yeah, I would take him here. I know it's tough because you already took a running back. I would take him. I mean, you're getting to put him with Gibbs, so that's going to be a plus. But it is tough. It is tough. That's the thing over in this format. It's tough on Underdog too, but it's tough, especially on DraftKings because of the full point PPR. When you take a running back with your first 2 picks and then you get that kind of value.
Yeah, I think so we're 1 pick away. I'll come back to that point definitely in a second. I think we probably with 1 running back, 1 tight end, and 1 wide receiver. Like here, looking at the guys available, Diggs falling slightly past ADP, then Tank Dell, George Pickens, Amari Cooper, Christian Kirk, and then as far as T. Higgins, but we're starting to reach a little there. My lean would be Tank Dell.
I would rank these Tank Dell, Stephon Diggs, George Pickens. So same page.
Love to hear it. So like over the course of the last week, I've been digging into DraftKings Millie Maker final lineups from last year, and I did the same the year before. And the one thing that just keeps coming back to me is there's not really a single way that you need to build on DraftKings that dominates compared to others. Last year, even in a year where we saw 0 running back be highly successful, it was still only making up about 7% of the final rosters. There were teams.
Was that also though because like on a people looking somewhere like DraftKings, you have 20 rounds. How much more often was Puka Nacua and Kyron Williams drafted versus Underdog? Because Underdog, there wasn't a ton of exposure to those 2 players, and they were absolute league winners.
Yeah, it's they were definitely a lot more common there, and it was a lot
Yeah.
easier to get them, like you say, with the 20 rounds. But they weren't dominant to the level which you might
Okay.
thought they would be. I've got the data and I can pull it
Probably a
up.
really good advance rate, but obviously, like, trying to win the whole thing, it doesn't matter. Like, if they don't have a shootout that week, then that kills it.
Yeah, let me just see. I'm pretty sure, like in terms of the players who got there, it was the kind of guys you'd expect to see when you looked at the guys who had massive weeks. Like Amari Cooper was on 54% of the rosters, and I think that kind of really influenced just about everything last year. Like,
Mm,
you're talking
yeah.
about,
Amari went
w-
bonkers with Joe Flacco. Him
yeah.
and Njoku both.
But then when you look at kind of how people built their lineups, let me just pull this up here. So I've got basically the most successful strategies, the most kind of reoccurring thing last year was late quarterbacks, so making sure you had at least one quarterback taken after round 14 and five wide receivers through round 10. That was something which I'd noticed last year when I dug into the data that I think it was 53% of teams in the 1500 person final from 2022 had that. And then last year it was 63%. So people are
But was
becoming
it
more
was
wide.
it mostly based on Stroud?
It was there was Stroud, there was Brock Purdy, of course, as well.
Yeah,
So like,
yeah, because Purdy, people weren't for sure, especially early
yeah.
on when we were drafting, if he would play early. Yeah.
And then you had Jared Goff as well, who was kind of sliding down there. But it was a year where late round kind of influenced everything. So I think that kind of helped a lot of people with their builds. But even still, Robust RB being almost as popular as the kind of zero RB was a little surprising to me. So I'm trying to be a little more open minded with my builds on DraftKings. I don't think you can get away with it on Underdog at all because it's just even
You get
thirstier. Like,
snowed under. Yeah. The other
it's
thing
like
I've noticed on DraftKings is you get some amazing ADP followers that I just don't see that often on Underdog until I play the more expensive drafts. You know what I mean? But
yeah.
once, yeah, when you're playing, $50+ drafts on Underdog, you see more people slide because it's like people are sticking more to their takes. But a lot of the stakes underneath, it's hard to get the big followers. I feel like almost every draft I'm in for DraftKings, like there's some crazy value that I'm not expecting falling in my lap. I don't know what
Yeah.
causes that, but
Yeah, and I think a big part of it's the onesie positions as much as anything because we don't see the wide receivers really fall. You sometimes see the running backs, but yeah, it's definitely
well,
players like
what's
Joe
available
Burrow.
here? I know we're
Yeah,
almost to it.
let me. So we've got Rashad White at the top of ADP, Joe Mixon, CJ Stroud, who we could take to stack with Dell, Anthony Richardson, Kyle Pitts, and then Calvin Ridley, Chris Godwin, Alvin Kamara, down as far as Kenneth Walker and Rashi Rice. CJ Stroud just went.
Yeah, I man, my gut leans to Rasheed Rice on the way back if you can get him. But
Yeah,
the quite just the upside that it gives you since you went ahead and took the tight end right and the running back already. With
yeah,
this next pick, I would lean receiver, but I'm just not crazy about the ones that are there. I do like Chris Godwin though. I mean, Chris Godwin. We get Liam Cohen there as the offensive coordinator. He's going to play more from the slot. We're probably going to see a little bit more motion with him as well. I
Chris
know.
Godwin was the player I was looking at, to be honest. Yeah, I
Okay.
think
Well, then I think that's who I would. I think that's who I would take here. I would let running back go.
I think we got a reasonable chance to get Rashi Rice back. The team on the corner had four wide receivers, so it felt like a risk that was,
Yep.
palatable. If it doesn't work out for us, then so be it. But yeah, like you, I'm kind of hoping that Chris Godwin can get back into the slot more often after like last year having was it a career low in slot rate of just like 36% or something. And then Rashi Rice, of course, does go to pick after us, and we're back on the clock.
Yeah, he's an
We have,
upside drafter. He also took Anthony Richardson.
yeah, Calvin Ridley, Keon Coleman are the next guys in ADP. We are losing a bit of ground on wide receiver. DeAndre Hopkins, Lad McConkey, or running back is Rashad White, who's 10 picks
Yeah,
past ADP. We got
I
10
don't mind
seconds.
White 10 picks past, but if not, I'd go Ridley.
Let's go Rashad White. I've got a little bit of a Ridley bias because I don't think he should be priced ahead of DeAndre Hopkins. I know you've written recently about how wide receivers hit that sort of age 31, age 32 point and just really drop off. Are you firmly more in on Ridley because of that and DeAndre Hopkins at the age he's at?
I would rather take Ridley, yes. But for also other reasons. I think that Ridley actually was pretty sneaky good. I don't know why he and Trevor Lawrence could never figure things out last year. But I mean, Ridley was earning targets. Ridley was earning valuable targets. I think he was doing, some good things. But with DeAndre Hopkins, based on this research that I did, it's these guys that were former elite wide receivers, really they're coin flips essentially every year to keep on giving you a wide receiver 1 finish or to suddenly turn into a wide receiver 4. So I just really tried to dig into, okay, well, great. If we know that about these guys, are there certain factors that tend to tell us that actually this one probably you want to stay away from? This one, you might get another one of those wide receiver 1 years out of them. And the challenge for Hopkins was he just checked off, several things that were on the side of, yeah, probably not getting another wide receiver 1 finish out of him. Now, the thing is, where you're getting to draft him in drafts is fine, but I don't want to take anybody that I think is going to be a wide receiver 4. Every player I take, I want to have some chance at upside. And I just feel like Hopkins at his age, given everything we've seen, has been pretty turbulent for him over the last 3 seasons. Injuries have been a bigger factor to his game, not just knocking him out of games, but keeping him from performing as well in games. And then his ability against man coverage has deteriorated, and that was a pretty big signal. Guys that went down. Now, it wasn't statistically significant to the point where you're just like, anytime you see this, you just fade this player. There were obviously guys that had kind of a bad year against man, and then the next year were pretty good. But my thing for him is just once you stack up everything. Once I stacked up everything, I'm like, okay, I don't mind dabbling in Hopkins is the way I put it, but he's not going to be anyone that I'm targeting a lot or centering my portfolio around. And obviously the other question is it's the Titans offense. We know they're going to throw the ball more, but can Will Levis support multiple weapons? We don't know.
As somebody who's drafted quite a bit of DeAndre Hopkins, it's definitely food for thought for me. I think for me,
well, hey, last year was good. I mean, he earned the targets. He did his part. They just didn't connect.
I think for me, it was as much as anything, I just see him as a bit value over Calvin Ridley. But like in this draft, we saw Hopkins go ahead of Ridley by 3 spots. If Hopkins does flip Ridley, that's probably going to be when I ease off completely. So we are through 6 rounds with Garrett Wilson, Jahmyr Gibbs, Sam Laporta, Tank Dell, Chris Godwin, and Rashad White. We've got quite a few running backs coming off the board. At the 4 spot, we've got Green Bean saying that this is their first DraftKings draft this year. Appreciate you joining us to do that with us tonight. Bijan Robinson, Mike Evans, Deebo Samuel, Hollywood Brown, Mahomes stacked up. Zamir White and Ramondre Stevenson is a fun start. So we probably still need to be looking at wide receiver. And with the way the draft board's gone, it doesn't feel too bad. I mean, at running back was James Conner, DeAndre Swift, Raheem Mostert. Wide receiver Jordan Addison, Brian Thomas Jr., Jameson Williams. Like the cliff edge is kind of really coming up quite quickly for wide receiver. Do you like Jordan Addison or Jameson Williams?
I did Brian Thomas Jr. just go?
Yeah.
I would go Addison or JSN. I like both of those over Jameson.
Yeah, I have a hard time drafting Jameson Williams, particularly when we've got Laporta and Gibbs already. So I think Jackson Smith and Jigba there makes sense. And this is the area of draft I just ignore the wide receiver ADP. If there's a guy I feel fits the build for us, then he fits the build. 2 picks before us, we've now got 4 wide receivers, 2 running backs, and a tight end. So the running backs are James Conner, DeAndre Swift, Raheem Mostert, Zach Moss, Najee Harris, Jaylen Warren. Jaylen Warren goes off the board to the guy at the 12th spot. Jameson Williams, Curtis Samuel, Romeo Doubs, Cortland Sutton, Josh
running back. I don't really like this pocket of wide receivers that much.
No, it's an area of the draft where, like, between picks 72 or 110, I just hammer running back a lot. So Warren's gone. Anybody stand out to you?
Did we get JSN or did we get Addison?
We got JSN, so we could take Swift for week 17 correlation.
That's what I was thinking.
Or we could take Jonathan Brooks for correlation with the Bucks.
Oh, man. I like the upside of Brooks better, to be honest, for late in the season.
Me too. I have a really difficult time clicking DeAndre Swift. I've got
mostly the way Swift gets. He's burned me so many times. The challenge for Swift is he landed in the worst possible spot last year for his skill set. Pass catcher. Jalen Hurts likes to scramble, and they're already loaded. It's really hard as a running back to get many targets when you have A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, and then, Dallas Goedert, who was in and out of the lineup. But it's tough. Saquon Barkley's about to face the same thing. He's not going to get near as many targets as what people are used to. Like, I expect his target share is probably going to drop 3 to 5% this year, would be my guess. So it's just a challenge in that offense. So I still think there's a chance that Swift is pretty good. I think the bigger issue for DeAndre Swift is he just doesn't seem to be able to play through nicks and bruises. And I think that actually really it matters for running backs. You've got to be able to be less than 100%, physically, and still go out and, your team can count on you and still produce. And I think that Swift just kind of seems to be one of these guys when everything's perfect, like he's a really efficient back. But if there's any little thing wrong with him, he tends to struggle. So I think that's his biggest issue.
Yeah, and for all we kind of expect the Bears to be an ascending offense, it kind of goes back to your point before about how last year he was in an offense that he was fighting for competition, and now you've thrown Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, who are going to earn targets, Rome Odunze, who is a top 10 draft talent, and then you throw in Cole Kmet, who I'm not particularly high on. I don't think is particularly great, but has been around the Bears for a while. You also add in Gerald Everett, who's got a pre-existing relationship with the offensive coordinator, and then you add in Roshan Johnson, who we all thought was a decent bet to be a sleeper pick last year, or a lot of us did. Khalil Herbert, who fantasy Twitter would love to get traded to the Cowboys or somewhere else. And
yeah, I would love it. And as a
just
Cowboys
think
fan, I would take that.
Like, how many backs do you think really emerge from out of these kind of 3-man committees? Because that's what I'm struggling with.
I think that's the question. Is he really in a 3-man committee or not? I don't think we know
Yeah.
that for sure. And I think that if we assume that, I don't think there's enough evidence for us to assume it and feel really great about it. I don't think there's enough evidence for us to assume that he's just going to get all the work either. But I'm leaving myself open to him being a guy that, gets 60% of the work, and then they split up the rest between the other two guys. And if that happens and their offense is good and he stays on this field inside the 5, that's going to be huge. That's the other thing that people seem to know that they can predict, is that he's not going to get the carries inside the 5-yard line. I don't think we're sure of that either. In fact, like from a utilization perspective, one of the things that's the least sticky year over year, once you get in the season, it gets a little better game to game and rolling 4 weeks over rolling 4 weeks. But season to season, who has the role inside the 5-yard line, it's not sticky at all. So when people act like, oh, somebody wasn't good or they didn't get that role last year, and because of that, they're not going to get it this year, historically, that hasn't worked out. Now, you can do it for the stars. There's star guys that are pretty much going to have that role. But when we're talking about the guys in the vein of DeAndre Swift, where we don't know for sure, it's not something that I think we should be overly confident that we know or we can get right ahead of the season. And because of those things, I just want to be open to having Swift on some teams. And mostly, I let the stacks dictate it for me. And that's how I'm getting my Swift exposure.
You make a good argument for it. It's definitely something to consider. Like I say, I generally avoid running backs in 3-way committees, but perhaps as the summer rolls on, maybe that's something will change my mind on that. So we're a couple of picks away. We've got, hope if I didn't do that, Brock Purdy, Jaden Daniels, both at the top. I know you're high on Jaden Daniels. Do you fancy taking him, or do you want to keep looking at wide receiver as Josh Palmer, Khalil Shakir, and then a couple of guys?
I love taking Jaden Daniels on a team like this where, you can still come back and get a Goff later. But I just feel like, you're giving yourself a chance that if everything goes right, you're getting Anthony Richardson, you're getting Lamar Jackson at a 5-round discount.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard for me to pass, because when he hits his ceiling, I think he's a difference maker for your fantasy team, regardless of what format. Best ball, dynasty, season long, whatever.
Yeah, and Jared Goff did go the team with the Amon-Ra St. Brown pick.
That's wild. That's just too early. I mean, that's really early for Jared Goff.
Just locking it in, knowing that there's a chance that we might have taken him. With 2 picks before us, and then I'd like to talk a little about Jaden Daniels, but wide receiver, it's Tyler Lockett and Brandon Cooks, who are both on your article about age cliff for wide receivers not looking great. Josh
Yeah.
Palmer, Rashid Shaheed, or at tight end, Dallas Goedert, who's just around his ADP, but he has the same bye week as Sam Laporta.
Yeah, I think I'm out on the tight ends here, given the bet we made on Laporta already. So Lockett works from a stack standpoint, with Seattle. If you look,
Or running
is it on
back,
us?
Singletary,
No, go
Benson,
back
Robinson,
receiver.
3 seconds.
Okay, well,
We'll go
we can
Tyler
go Lockett.
Lockett.
I was going to say was Shaheed still there because that was
He was, oh yeah, sorry.
so in a vacuum, Shaheed's the name I want there. But like Lockett works out fine.
Yeah. You must be drafting him with Scott Fishbowl at the minute, right, Dwayne?
Oh, am I? I don't
Well,
know.
I don't know.
It's
Are you
been
not?
stuck at this. It was been stuck at the turn pick for a while. So.
No, well, I just meant in general. Are you drafting him?
Oh yeah, I'm
And
like
Scott
4
Fish-
picks away.
How are you coping with the kick returner stuff? Because that's been a hot topic in our Discord. Which, if you join our channel, you can jump in. Loads of good strategy advice in there from a lot of our members. But the kick returner scoring in that is pretty funky, and I've seen Rashid Shaheed going in some drafts like in the 5th round. Are you expecting that much of a big difference from them in that?
I saw
Really
him go that high too. I think the challenge is he even really going to have that role? I think there's a
with a
lot
new
to still
offensive
determine.
coordinator.
And if they are suddenly depending on him in 2 wide receiver sets to be the man, I don't know that they're going to roll him out there on kickoffs. I think he might get an occasional return. I'm not pretending to know, but what I'm saying is at this point in the season, it's really hard to nail those things down. I do think that NFL teams are probably also going to approach it a little bit differently and maybe be a little bit more willing to put some of their stars out there, knowing that it could turn into a big play for them. But even we go back into the days where there were more kick returns for touchdowns and stuff, there were usually specialists, not your main guys that are getting the ball all the time on offense. So I've been pretty leery of getting overly, thinking that I can
Yeah.
predict which guys are going to get those touches, even though we may think we know that right now. So
Yeah. So Jaden Daniels, you've got him listed as one of your league winners in one of your articles. Are you just smashing him as often as possible in these DraftKings drafts or underdog drafts at the minute?
yeah, I mean, especially if it's a situation where, like what just happened to us, that some of your stacks you missed out on with some of your early wide receivers, and you're just looking for that upside pick, especially in the range where he goes to. It kind of gets to a point to where there's nothing that is. I'm like, oh my God, these other picks could help me win the league. It very clearly stands out to me that Jaden Daniels is the guy in that range. And it just comes back to a simple thing. I mean, everybody knows the cheat code is rushing quarterbacks. I mean, if he gets 100 carries, it's going to be super hard for him to not be a top 10 player. And if he's a better passer than we anticipate as a rookie, well, then he's going to have an even higher upside. Then he suddenly goes from being a top 10 guy to having the ability to be a top 5 or 6 player. And I think the spike weeks are going to be pretty big either way.
Yeah, so we are 2 picks away. One player we could take to stack with Jaden Daniels is Jahan Dotson. We're sitting with 1-3-5-1 at the minute.
I like it. I don't go Dotson a lot, but if I've got Jaden Daniels, I'm very willing to do it.
Yeah, that's for me. It's kind of like the get out of jail card is pulling that. Jaden Daniels, if I don't have the stack and going, I'm going to take Jahan Dotson and hope that Jaden Daniels' downfield throwing is better than Sam Howell's was. And that doesn't feel like too much of a reach to make. So through this point in the draft, through 11 rounds, Garrett Wilson, Jahmyr Gibbs, Sam Laporta, Tank Dell, Chris Godwin, Rashad White, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Jonathan Brooks, Jaden Daniels, Tyler Lockett, Jahan Dotson. Feels like we're in a pretty healthy way. Like we can go a lot of different ways with our next pick. The team on the corner's gone running back heavy for their last 4 picks after being very wide receiver heavy to start the draft. They take Trevor Lawrence to pair with Christian Kirk. So, Dwayne, we're about to be back on the clock. At running back, Zeke, Rico Dowdle, Zach Charbonnet, Kendre Miller, Ty Chandler, wide receiver, Gabe Davis, Josh Downs, Michael Wilson, Polk, or tight end, Cole Kmet, Luke Musgrave, and then Taysom
Yeah, I think
Hill.
I'm out on tight end still, just with Laporta. But at the wide receiver spot, I do like Polk. What's Josh Downs? That's Giants, right?
Yeah.
Go back. What are the running backs you
Oh,
said?
Michael Wilson, running back 7 seconds. Charbonnet, Dowdle, Elliott. 3.
Yeah, I like Polk here.
Yep,
To
we
be
could take
honest,
bulk then. That works nicely. So now we're sitting on a 1-3-7-1, and things are kind of ticking over nicely. Just going back to your Jaden Daniels point, like I was definitely a bit wary of him earlier in the offseason. I think it's it's really difficult not to see some of the hits that he took in college and think in the NFL that could be so much worse. But where his price is, I also think that there's potentially another round climb in ADP for him over the course of the summer, because there's just no way that he's going to have less than 5 rush attempts per game, really. And when that's the kind of number which I've found to be a good barrier, that if quarterbacks are giving you 5 rush attempts per game, then there's a very good chance they're going to give you top finishes. Like over the last 2 years, there were 44 instances of a quarterback scoring more than 30 points, and then 44 of those, out of those 44, sorry, 61% featured a quarterback rushing for 5 or more attempts in a game. So yeah, I'm just happy to lean into the rushing upside as long as he kind of stays where he is and he's not getting too crazily expensive. But if he jumped sort of like
I mean,
past
I think you
Kyler
can make an
Murray,
argument. I think you could make an argument that he should push all the way up to where Kyler is. I think
well,
you could make that argument. So
that's what I was going to say. Like, is the argument on Kyler Murray? Yes, Daniels doesn't have Marvin Harrison, doesn't have Trey McBride, but they feel like similar bets at the minute.
they are. They are. I also think that Jaden Daniels is going to be more involved in the design run game than Kyler Murray. So I expect Jaden Daniel to have more rushing attempts than Kyler.
Yeah. In terms of the Cardinals, like, are you expecting a really good season for Kyler Murray? Or are you kind of like wary that maybe it's just never going to happen in the way that it looked like?
No, I'm not worried about it. I love taking Kyler too. Like he's still the kind of bet we want to make. He's still in his, prime years for a quarterback, and you got to look at that a little bit different for guys that run. But Kyler's pretty good at protecting himself. He doesn't take a lot of the huge hits. He knows when to get down. Now, he's obviously had lower body extremity issues, it seems like, almost every season. And so, I mean, there's some risk with him. He's just one of these, twitchy guys that seems to pull things a lot. And so I don't think we can predict whether or not that's going to stop, or if that's going to keep on. So that's a risk. But overall, it's the talent profile we want. And you already mentioned Marvin Harrison Jr. coming to town. I still think Kyler Murray has the talent to be a guy that could throw for 4,500 yards and rush for 700, so it's like, that's kind of rare. You're not going to, you can count those people, on one hand. Actually, you can't even use your whole hand. There's not that many in the league that can do that. I think Kyler Murray has a higher passing upside than Lamar Jackson. He just doesn't have quite the same ceiling as Lamar does on the ground.
Yeah, definitely. I think second year in
And
that offense.
that's where I would comp Jaden. I think really his ceiling is more Lamar. I don't expect
Yeah.
year one to him to have a chance to compete with Murray in passing yards. But would it surprise me if Jaden Daniels ran for 900, 800 yards and Lamar ran for 1,000 like that? I think
Yeah.
that could happen.
So we're back on the clock. Tyler Algier gives a little week 17 correlation with Washington, or Geno Smith to stack up
I
with.
like Algier, and I think you probably get Geno coming back. Algier, I think, I don't know what your thoughts are, but is there a better pure handcuff? We don't know that he's going to have much of a role outside of being a handcuff. But like if
That
Bijan went down, like if the starter went down, is there a better clean handoff to here's the next dude, and he's still young and we think he's good?
that was the exact question I was going to throw to you after drafting him
Beat you
on
to it.
Sunday in this Fantasy Pros Championship. Like, and that's why I asked Andrew Erickson, who I was drafting the team with. Like, there's no better player, because if Bijan Robinson had never landed there, then we could have been taking Algier, perhaps like round 3, round 4 player. Geno Smith, easy pick here to take our second
Yes.
quarterback.
Yeah.
How high are you on the Seahawks with this kind of new offense? I know that Mike McDonald keeps talking about establishing the run, but everything we know about Ryan Grubb doesn't really say that that's going to be what he leans towards.
Well, Ryan Grubb does run the ball more than I think people realize, but I think it's still going. So I think it's if we were playing Madden, you'd be picking the pass balance playbook, right? So I don't think they're going to turn into this all out throw the ball all the time team, but I think they're going to be pass balanced. They're still going to run the ball quite a bit, but they're going to use that to really try to set up their big plays. And I think they'll look to be a team that wants to push the ball down the field. Now, ultimately, wide receivers earn a dot. The good news is you already know that DK Metcalf is a guy that can work deep. Tyler Lockett, even though he's getting older, loses some speed, like he's still going to be someone they can use on those deep crossers. I think the real key to the Seahawks passing game going to another level is the guy that we took early, which is Jackson Smith and Jigba, who, in my opinion, was completely misused last year. If you saw what Shane Waldron did, number one, didn't get him on the field enough. Talking about a team that only used 11 personnel 63% of the time when you've got 3 wide receivers like what they had. Now, some of that could have been induced by Pete Carroll, who just maybe gave the mandate. No, we want to mix up our personnel groups, have heavy than light, heavy than light. We don't know everything that happens behind the scenes, but getting all 3 of those guys out there, I think we're going to see more. Okay, so I mean I think that's positive, seeing it coming from Washington. And then the other thing is the low A dot stuff. Yeah, while Jackson Smith and Jigba wasn't a deep threat in college, he was very good still at working the seams, getting mismatches against linebackers, safeties, those sort of things. So I think if they can get him more involved in like that intermediate area, even in that Cooper Cup, Amon-Ra St. Brown range, not just not so low and tied to the line of scrimmage, man, it could be, I think, a big upgrade for the Seahawks. I think they're going to be one of the sneaky offenses that surprise people.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. We're starting to plan out our redraft content around here, and today was going over offenses with sneaky upside, and the Seahawks were one of those that I just put straight in there because, like you say, there's just lots of little reasons for optimism. And the big thing that kind of really harmed JSN was the wrist injury, wasn't it? Like, I think if you're not ready to go, then teams just, they change their plans so quickly, and I think that really kind of set him back. We're 3 picks away. We've got our 2 quarterbacks in Jaden Daniels with Jahan Dotson, and then Geno Smith with Jackson Smith and Jigba, Tyler Lockett. We've got 2, 4, 7, 1 at the moment, and we're kind of getting into that area of the draft where quarterbacks starting to dry up. There's plenty of tight ends around. Isaiah Likely, Derek Carr, Roman Wilson,
So
Ben
gives you
Sinnott.
another target from Jaden Daniels. That's who I would.
Yeah.
He
Elijah Mitchell,
falls,
Tyler Conklin. Well, that's what I was going to say. We could even there's Noah Fant coming up as well. We could be a 2 tight end or a 3 tight end
Noah Fant's
build.
up too? Okay, yeah. That's the one thing I hate about these is like trying to keep up with all the picks that are happening.
So, I mean, obviously, Geno with Jackson Smith and Jigba, Tyler Lockett. Would you rather add Noah Fant or Ben Sinnott?
I like being more balanced, like having a guy, 2 different guys stacked personally.
That works for me.
With
Let's
2.
say Ben Sinnott. Yeah. So then after this pick, if you were to look at running back, we've got Tyrone Tracy, Khalil Herbert.
I like
Braylon
Herbert based on all the Seattle stuff we've done.
Yeah, it makes sense, and it gives us week 16 correlation as well as week 17 correlation. Aside from that, there's Roman Wilson, Troy Franklin, Luke McCaffrey, Demarcus Robinson, and then tight end. I feel like we could probably revisit that if we want to add a third one when things come back around to us, if you're happy with Khalil Herbert. These are the Spike Week tools. If you want this overlay, as well as access to loads of our other products, you can hit the join button down below, choose our golden deck chair package. You get 40% off all Spike Week products, as well as getting access to my best ball rankings for both DraftKings, Underdog, loads of other best ball resources in there. Rich's dynasty content, which I'm not elaborating when I say like easily some of the best in the industry. His rookie guide this year, almost 200 pages of film analysis and his rookie model. It's all incredible. But if you're not going to do that, at least hit the subscribe button, because next week we've got Mike Leone coming on. The week after, we've got Dwayne's colleague Ian Hartitz rounding out our little trip down fantasy life after Chris Allen was with us last week. So I'm going to have to stop. I'm going to have to start banging on Matthew Berry's door next, I guess. But you guys have been busy cranking out new tools and new suites. Is there anything in particular that you're really excited about to go into this season with?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, and folks can go check it out. Just go over to fantasylife.com. But I mean, we have got an entire new suite of tools. It's Fantasy Life Plus. So if whether you're looking to do more home league stuff and you want somewhere to easily be able to go in and do your mock drafts, you can do that. Obviously, you have all the analysis from me and from Ian and from Chris and everybody else, but just all of the different tools. We've got a best ball hub as well. So yeah, I would just tell people to go check it out. I think we added 30 new tools so far. That's all part of that. And we've got another 15 to 20 that'll hit before the season starts, including some upgrades to the utilization report, which I just had a meeting with this morning, a kickoff meeting with the team about here are all the things that we've been planning that we're going to build. And now we're about to start building them. So going to be a lot of really cool stuff.
It is easily one of my favorite websites to visit, particularly the newsletter as well is one of those few ones that every single day I spend my lunchtime reading. We're a few picks away. Let me recap the team for you, Dwayne. We got Garrett Wilson, Jahmyr Gibbs, Sam Laporta, Tank Dell, Chris Godwin, Rashad White, JSN, Jonathan Brooks, Jaden Daniels, Tyler Lockett, Jahan Dotson, Polk, Algier, Geno Smith, Ben Sinnott, and Khalil Herbert. It feels like quite a nice team to me. 2-5-7-2.
What round are we in?
We're in round 17. So we've got Derek Carr just goes off the board after quite a bit of a fall. QB wise, there's nobody else stacked with players we've already got. Running back, Damian Pierce, Will Shipley, Keaton Mitchell, Audric Estime, Abanikanda. Wide receiver, Roman Wilson, Jalen Hyatt, Devontae Walker, Rondale Moore, Trey Palmer.
I like Elijah Mitchell, with us having the Lions guys. And I still think like he's the running back, the backup to own right now in San Francisco. It's hard to say for sure how that's going to work out, but Elijah Mitchell is the guy I would target here.
Elijah Mitchell looks like he went off the board.
Oh,
there.
Okay. I thought you said he was there.
Sorry, no. Damian Pierce, Will Shipley, Audric Estime.
Pierce I like Pierce too. He doesn't correlate with anything that we have, but yeah, I think similar situation.
Because last year it felt like schematically he just wasn't the right fit. Do you think with another off season that he could find a way to fit in that offense behind Joe Mixon?
Possibly. The challenge that I've had is I haven't found that data to be very sticky year over year. A running back being good in a certain kind of scheme versus not. Now some of it probably comes down to split size, but whenever I've tried to test that and say, is that something that's really predictive? It hasn't worked out. So I'm not saying it doesn't matter. Obviously certain running backs are better in certain schemes than others, but I wouldn't let it cause me to rule a player out based on the data that I've researched.
Nice. So we're back up at wide receiver, Odell Beckham, Darius Slayton, Jalen Tolbert, Javon Baker, Chase Claypool. Let me just double check. I think he went off.
He would probably be higher.
Yeah. Otherwise, Kendrick Bourne, Devontae Walker, Greg Dortch. We've got 8 seconds. Gesicki,
Juwan
Johnson.
Pick who you like. Pick who you like. It's hard for me to see what's happening.
I'll go with Juwan Johnson because I think that he is going to be, even if he misses a little bit of time, I'm okay with it. And just generally speaking on DraftKings, I'm much happier taking 3 tight ends than I would be on Underdog where you've only got the 18 picks. Going through all the data I've looked at from the finalists, and it's very reactive. You're not looking at every single pick data because DraftKings doesn't release it. But I've just not seen anything that makes me think that 2 tight end builds offers a significant advantage. I know you draft over here a decent bit, Dwayne. Are you mainly a 3 tight end person, or do you, if you've taken...
I do more 3 tight ends over here. I do more 3 quarterbacks over here. I mean, I still have some teams where I only have 2 quarterbacks and 2 tight ends, but it all still comes back to draft capital. For some reason I took Sam Laporta, fell to me in round 3, and then Trey McBride slid to me somehow, in round 4, for example, round 5, came all the way down and back, and I end up with 2 tight ends. Then I'm done, right? But otherwise, I'm basically, if I take someone like Laporta, if I take another tight end by probably Bowers, I'm usually done. Because I'm just betting on Bowers at that point. But if not, then I'm more open to doing 3. Same kind of thing with quarterback. For the most part, though, I'm ignoring most quarterback ADP slides. I don't typically dip my toe back in the water just because a guy's like 15 picks past ADP, unless it matches my stacks. Say I passed on Joe Burrow and I happen to have Higgins, and now he's 20 picks past, and I've already got CJ Stroud. Then depending what's on the board, I might do it, and then I wouldn't take another quarterback. But other than those scenarios, honestly, I let the end of the draft kind of dictate some of that. And in the guys that are falling, I'll be much more willing to say, okay, I'll take 3 quarterbacks on this team, or I'll take 3 tight ends.
Yeah, it's just tricky because obviously Tua, when he slides, there's no point. CJ Stroud, when he slides, unless you
Yep.
want to go with Schultz, there's no point.
There's no
Jordan Love,
backdoor.
unless yeah, Jordan Love, unless you want the tight ends or Dontavian Wicks. But I mean, it's definitely tricky. Sometimes I'll take Kirk Cousins if there's been a big slide and then take Darnell Mooney. But yeah, generally it's kind of easier sometimes to just pass over those guys till you get to this kind of range of Gino, Bryce Young, Daniel Jones, Derek Carr, who nobody wants to draft Derek Carr. We are 2 picks away. I think we're kind of good at running back with 6 now. We've got Jahmyr Gibbs, Rashad White, Jonathan Brooks, Tyler Algier, Khalil Herbert, and Damian Pierce. We could go with another wide receiver here if you like. In terms of, I'll go over to the flex position. We've got Jelani Woods, Tank Bigsby, Kendrick Bourne, Rondale Moore, Zach Ertz, Josh Reynolds, Juwan Jennings,
I
Alan
like Rondell
Lazard.
Moore on this one
I like I like Rondale
for
Moore too. Gives
against
us that week's
Washington. Yeah.
yeah, gives that correlation. And then so that's gonna set us with a 2-6-8-3. At quarterback, there's Minshew, Aiden O'Connell. Running back, it's pretty grim. I don't know, like Jamal Williams, Rashad Penny, Garendo,
I think
Tank
Bigsby
Bigsby.
has a really good chance to be the clear cuff there, to ETN.
Do you
Um,
think like I'm happy to take Bigsby. I think that structurally that's kind of fine. But do you think he can kind of bounce back like because last year it wasn't
yeah, I
just
mean,
bad, like
I think I mean, he made mistakes. I think it's fine. He was a rookie. I think it happens. Like there's obviously no guarantee, but I just look at that depth chart and I'm like, I think they're gonna wanna give him another shot.
I mean, everything like the one thing I kind of tend to pay attention to is coaches talking unprompted about players, and it just seems like the Jags have come out several times this offseason and talked up Tank Bigsby to a level that they didn't necessarily have to do. So, yeah, hopefully he gets another opportunity, and this time the ball doesn't bounce off his hand straight into a defender's for a
Yeah.
pick six. But
And my
so
theory on some of that is the coaches know, like, how to punch their players' buttons, and they know which ones may need more carrot, which ones may need more stick, and they use the media to a lot of times get those messages across, which is weird. It just seems like you just have a talk, but whatever
yeah,
reason, like, they use the media. So, been going on a long time. But yeah, I'm with you. It is interesting when you get those unprompted, messages through the media about players.
yeah, I've got Greg from Coach Speak Index coming on in the next week or two, and we're going to talk through some of those situations that he thinks are worth paying attention to.
Yeah,
Absolutely
it's a
one of
great
the best
account.
Twitter accounts. Yeah, this time of year, I feel like he's probably not going to sleep a lot, but it's going to be excellent content for all of us. That is the end of the draft. We've got Garrett Wilson, Jahmyr Gibbs, Sam Laporta, Tank Dell, Chris Godwin, Rashad White, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Jonathan Brooks, Jaden Daniels, Tyler Lockett, Jahan Dotson, Jalen Polk, Tyler Algier, Geno Smith, Ben Sinnott, Khalil Herbert, Damian Pierce, Juwan Johnson, Rondale Moore, Tank Bigsby. In terms of our week 17 correlation, we've got 5 players from the Falcons Washington game. In terms of the Seahawks, we've got 4 players out of the Seahawks Chicago game, kind of hoping that Khalil Herbert doesn't get traded to your Cowboys, Dwayne.
Yeah.
And then Carolina at Tampa Bay, we've got Rashad White, Jonathan Brooks, and Chris Godwin, which like that's a nice amount of week 17 correlation. We mixed in a good amount of rookies and veterans. How are you feeling about the team?
Yeah, I like it. Hey, I wanted to ask you, over on DraftKings, do you worry much about the weeks before? I know, like, Mike Leone, who you're gonna have on next week, did a really good article on the underdog stuff, talking about really one of the edges that's still out there is people are not correlating enough in the 2 weeks leading up to that, in the playoffs. So I didn't know if
Yeah,
that's something that you've really looked into, in the way that DraftKings is structured.
so DraftKings is a little bit easier to get through the finals than Underdog. Like Underdog, particularly on BBM, you're looking at like sometimes like what 1 in 16, 1 in 15, or 1 in 18. Whereas DraftKings, it's very much still 1 of 12 at worst. So I think it's 2 of 12 from your pod go through, and then maybe even 2 of 12 in the next one, and then 1 of 12. Like so. I don't think you need to quite worry about it. Whereas, like, once you throw in 18 teams to try and get through a week 15 matchup or a week 16, and you're looking at dealing with 50% more teams when you're likely going to have a lot of similar players, then I think betting for those weeks is really strong. I don't tend to chase it, but using the spike week overlays, I mean, it's just kind of quite handy. So, like, we've got Washington correlated with the Saints in week 15. We've got the Jets correlated with Jacksonville in week 15.
Yeah.
Chicago.
See, I'm looking at
Chicago.
that stuff all the time on Underdog. And I
Yeah.
have been like since the tournament dropped, for some of the reasons you're talking about, but I hadn't like just set my brain to thinking about it that much for DK, so that's why I asked.
Yeah, definitely. And like I say, I think these are all the kind of edges that help because DraftKings is still a more casual audience. So giving yourself little advantages like that are definitely going to be worthwhile. It just, for me, I always think so much about the fact that the DraftKings finals, particularly in the Millie Maker, less so in some of the new contests that are dropping, but you're looking at 1,021 people in the final this year, whereas in BBM you're talking about 450 or so. So the difficulty in winning the week 17 aspect on DraftKings still feels much harder than perhaps getting there. So yeah, it's definitely a tricky balance, but I think as long as you're being mindful as you're building your teams and you're looking for those little week 17 correlations. Like I love the Chicago. It always feels fairly easy to set up the 3 stack of Vikings, the Lions, and the Seahawks. So
Yeah, I end up drafting too many players from those teams because it's so easy. To be honest, I've got to like really go back and look at all my exposure. Like that, like jumped out to me as soon as the schedule came out, and I just started building those teams. And it's just like no possible way to get like sniped on it all. Like you're going to end up with some form of correlation across them. But I've probably gotten too comfortable with it, to be honest.
yeah, one of the things which I'm trying to do better is not overstack for the sake of stacking. Like when I've looked into the finalist teams for the last 2 years, like the most common builds by far is just skinny stack still. Like quarterback plus 1 wide receiver is twice as popular as any other stack that's made the final for like 2 years running. The next nearest is quarterback plus 1 wide receiver and 1 tight end. Like the team that won last year had Matthew Stafford stacked with both Cam Akers and Kyron Williams. So it's like there's so many little bits that get funky. I'm going to put out a video, probably not this week, but next week on all the things which I found. And like I say, it's not the most perfect science compared to Underdog, where they released a pick by pick data, but it does. I think a little information definitely helps more than nothing at all. But Dwayne, I know you're a
Yeah, I'll
busy
be looking
man.
forward to that.
I know you've got articles left, right, and center to write. So I'm going to let you get out of here. But before you do, anything in particular people should be checking out on Fantasy Life this week?
Yeah, just go check out the website. And like I said, there's all the new tools. And my wide receiver tiers are up. They're for free. My tight end tiers will drop on Friday. Today, an article dropped about 4 playmakers with league winning upside. So all that's out there. Also, obviously, like I mentioned, Ian is churning out content as well. So yeah, you guys come check it out and let us know what you think.
Lovely. John, I see your messages in the chat. Drop me a DM on Twitter and I'll get back to you. I promise I just do have to rush also. I will be back next Wednesday with Mike Leone. The week after, Ian Hartitz. We've got multiple underdog guests lined up over next month for Monday shows with Tyler. Rich is starting to grind out more Dynasty content and redraft. We have so many plans for redraft. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and we will be back very soon.